Okay, we're back with part 2, and this is where we left off with part 1. Okay, we have equations for each of the three administrators. Okay, C equals 160 plus 0 times the number of detentions, because Mr. Power just charged 160 bucks each. C equals 20 times the number of detentions. So if you get 14 detentions, you're going to pay $280. And Ms. Harnrein, who charges $100 upfront and $5 per detention. So what I want to do right now is I want to graph them. Okay. So my printer did not print out the grid on the page that I had. So I have just made my own grid. And how I did this is I just halved everything. Okay. I knew I wanted to go up to $200. Okay. And I want you to go up $200. So I put the 200 at the top. Then I put 100 there, and then I halved that to get 50, and I halved that to get 25, and I tried to space them out appropriately. They're not perfect, as you can see. There's a lot more distance between the 150 and 175 as there's 200. If they're not perfect, it won't make our graph look perfect, but it will be close enough for what we're doing. On the bottom, I want you to go up to about 20 detentions. So $200 and 20 detentions. On the bottom, I went by twos. Okay, so on the side here, don't forget to label your axis. Cost and detentions. Okay, so let's first graph Mr. Powers. Mr. Powers is pretty easy. Okay, if that's 150 and that's 175, I'm assuming that 160 is somewhere in there, maybe a bit lower than that. I'll try to make it straight here. Mr. Powers' line goes straight across, okay? You have to pay him 160 bucks no matter what. If you get 0 detentions, if you get 10 detentions, if you get 18 detentions, if you get 20 detentions, it's 160 bucks right across, okay? Mr. Baggio in orange. Well, Mr. Baggio's is a bit different. He does start at 0, 0. So my initial value is all the way down here. Okay, and I'm not going to graph every single point. Let's go with at 10 detentions. He is already at $200, and that maxes out our graph. So if I can do that right there. Okay, and let's put one in the middle at, let's say, 4 detentions. He's at 80, 75, roughly right there. Okay, so now let's graph Mr. Baggio's. You can see that I'm a little bit off here. 10 should be right about there, maybe. And we're doing our best here. Okay, this is where grid lines would really help. Okay, so that is Mr. Baggio. Now, whenever you have more than one graph on a piece of paper, always, always, always label the lines. So Mr. Baggio, Mr. Power, now we have Ms. Harnrein. So Ms. Harnrein starts a little bit different. Ms. Harnrein starts at 100. And let's go to 10 detentions. At 10 detentions, she's only at 150. And at 14 detentions, she's at 170. Right about there, I think. So now let's take a look at this. Okay, and this is Mrs. H. Okay. So now, this is what our graph looks like. It looks very, well, it's confusing a little bit, okay? But let's take a look at this. Remember what our y-axis is. The lower the point is, the cheaper it is, okay? So if we wanted best cost scenario here, you always have to go with a lower line. So let's take a look at our students. Well, Cameron gets about 5 detentions a year. So if we went up to 5 detentions, right here, we can see 5 detentions, it looks like Mr. Baggio is slightly cheaper. And let's look at this. 5 detentions would fit right in here. Well, 5 detentions for Mr. Baggio, if we put right in the middle there, 5 detentions would be $100. Where 5 detentions for Miss Harnerine would be $125. Okay, so for Cameron, Mr. Baggio's the way to go. For Savannah, gets 9 detentions a year. Well, 9 detentions is right here. So we go up and we find the lowest number. 9 detentions is right about here. Maybe right about here. And we can see that Miss Harnerine should be the best bet for her. Okay, 9 detentions a year. Well, let's look at Miss Harnerine. For 9 detentions, you can see here between 140 and 150 would be $145. 9 detentions here would be between 160 and 200 would be $180. So 145 is the cheapest, and 9 detention for Mr. Power is $160. So that is your best bet there. Taking a look at this, your cheapest is always your lowest line. So your cheapest would follow along this right here. So that would be your cheapest bet. Okay. For example, if you are going to get less than, well, let's take a look at the numbers between Miss Harnerine and Mr. Baggio. So it's somewhere once Mr. Baggio is more expensive at 8 detentions, but Mr. Baggio is less expensive at 6 detentions. So therefore, it's somewhere between 6 and 8 detentions that you should choose. So if you got 7 detentions, I believe Mr. Baggio would be the best. Between around 7 detentions and 12 detentions, because at 12 detentions, you can see here, they cost the exact same. Okay? So between 7 and 12 detentions, Miss Harnerine's the best, and anything over 12 detentions, your best bet is to go with Mr. Power. So obviously Madison, who's getting 25 per year, which is just off the charts here, much cheaper to go with Mr. Power there. Okay? Okay, so that's the grid. Now we need to answer some questions. Well, we've already kind of done this, so this should go quick. The initial value for Mr. Power, it was 160 with a rate of change of 0. The initial value for Mr. Baggio was 0 with a rate of change of 20, and the initial value for Miss Harnerine was 100 with a rate of change of 5. And that you can get from the words here, 105, 20 plus 0 down, and 160 for unlimited, so therefore a 0 rate of change there. Okay? What does the initial value and rate of change represent in each situation? Well, the initial value is how much money you have to put down. How much money you have to pay up front. Now, the rate of change is how much money you pay per detention. For example, initial value, Mr. Power, you pay $160 up front and $0 per detention. Mr. Baggio, $0 up front, $20 per detention. Miss Harnerine, $100 up front, $5 per detention. Create an equation. Well, we've already done that, okay? I always like to look at the equation before we look at the graph, mainly because it's easy to get the equation from the table of values and the situation. Mr. Power was the cost was equal to 160. No matter what, if you want, you can put, let me put it in green because it's not, you don't have to put it in there, plus 0D, but that's not needed. Okay, Mr. Baggio, was cost is equal to, well, you could put 0 plus 20 times the number of detentions, or just write cost is equal to 20D. And Miss Harnerine was the cost is equal to 100 plus 5 times D. Okay? Okay. So that is how to do the graph and how to fill out this table, look at the initial value and everything like that. The next video will probably be the most important, and that's when we're going to go algebraically, and that will build on the solving equations that we did last week. So part 3 coming up.